Ruth Rathblott is an expert on inclusion and diversity. She's a TEDx and inspirational speaker, best-selling author, and an award-winning nonprofit leader. She was born with a limb difference and speaks to companies on issues of equity and belonging, the gifts of being unique, and the freedom of accepting your differences. Ruth was profiled as a CEO in the New York Times corner office and received a Goucher College's Excellence in Public Service Award, among other awards, for her outstanding leadership in the nonprofit sector. She spent her entire career focused on providing opportunities for those who have been underrepresented. She serves as a board member of the Lucky Finn Project. Ruth resides in New York City. I am proud to have gotten to know her over the last couple years at the National Speakers Association. So, Ruth, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. I'm excited to talk to you and to be here.
Yeah, we normally don't do this with headphones and Zoom. We kind of do it in person. So this will be nice. So, starting us out, Ruth, your journey is so important that I want to start there. Tell us a little bit about your journey and why the topic of inclusion and diversity is so important to you.
Yes, definitely. I think you briefly touched on it with my intro. I think the first piece to know is I was born with a limb difference. I was born missing my left hand and thinking about that as a disability. But it wasn't talked about in my family growing up. It wasn't something that we mentioned. So I was encouraged to try everything. I was really kind of expected to try everything and do everything. And what's interesting, Mike, is that during my teenage years, I started to notice the difference. I started to notice that I wanted to fit in, which, during adolescent years is amplified because you just want to fit in. And so I started actually hiding my hand. I started putting it in my front pocket or wearing longer sleeves so no one would see it. And what I didn't realize by doing that is that it was something that I thought about all the time because I didn't want anyone to find out about my limb difference. And it also kept me from doing the things that I wanted to really be doing, like sports and theater and student government, because I didn't want anyone to see my hand. So it stopped me not only from connecting with other people and them knowing me, but it actually stopped me from doing the things I loved. And I fast forward that journey of hiding because I actually did it starting at the age of 13 and I did it for 25 years. I hid. And I hid it in my personal life, I hid it in my professional life. And Mike, it wasn't until a conversation a few years ago where we were talking about diversity and leadership. And at one point during that conversation, I said, "Well, I'm just curious, do you see me as diverse?" And the answer back was, "Well, you're a woman." And I said, "Okay, that's a lens of diversity. That's that gender lens." Because we often talk about diversity around race, we talk about diversity around gender, and maybe sexual orientation. And yet, disability doesn't always come into the conversation. So when I pressed it a little bit further and said, "What about my disability? What about my limb difference?" The answer back was, "Oh, we don't see you like that." And I said, I'm not asking to be seen like that. I'm asking for it to be acknowledged as part of the true definition of diversity, different perspectives, different ideas, valuing that difference." And Mike, I started reaching out to some of my corporate partners and thinking about how are they talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that DEI piece that has become so relevant in so many corporations. And the reality is that they weren't necessarily talking about disability. It wasn't part of the agenda for diversity. And so my passion project has become, how do we expand the conversation on diversity?
That's so interesting. And, for a lot of people, when that person you were talking to came back and said, "Oh, we don't see you that way." Like my first reaction is, "Oh, is that a compliment? Like you don't see me that way." But you took it differently and learned something. Why help us understand why is it important to see whether it's a limb difference or something else that's not typically looked at as about diversity and inclusion? Why is it important to expand that definition?
I think there are three reasons. I think that it's important to expand the definition because the largest group of minority is disability. Disability cuts across all lines. It can be first visible or invisible, right? So we can be visible like mine or invisible like mental health or neurodiversity. So we have that space. It's the largest minority group. It intersects across all lenses of diversity. You can be any race, any gender, any age. You can be born with a disability or you can acquire one at some point, and you can also be taking care of somebody with a disability. So the conversation around disability is actually a conversation for all of us. That's the big piece of why it's so important to make sure that it's included in diversity conversations. I think the second piece to this is with disability and the diversity conversations, the way we're defining diversity can leave people out of the conversation or feeling like they're left out of the conversation. So we're excluding people in an inclusion world. And that's not the goal of diversity. The goal of diversity is to value different perspectives. And so it's critical if we want people, if we want to include people, we need to expand that definition so that people feel included. We can't leave people out because they aren't part of race and gender and sexual orientation, which, don't get me wrong, are really important pillars of the diversity conversation. And there's enough room at the table to continue to build out that table and invite people in. And I think the third piece to it is to raise awareness and understanding within workplaces, within leadership, of how to really connect with people. We're going through a time right now where people are quitting, they're resigning, they're getting laid off, and the people who are staying need to have a culture that helps them feel like they belong, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel that different perspectives are valued. So I think it's important as we think about diversity, how are we talking about it?
So digging into that, how are we talking about it part? Because I'm the opposite of what people, I'm an old white guy, right? I mean, that's what leadership teams were always made up of. And so I'm curious when you think of, I'm going to make it personal to you. So when that person said, well, we don't look at you that way. And you're like, no, we've got to expand the definition of diversity. How do you want, if you're, let's say you're a member of a leadership team, how do you want folks to approach you about that, to treat you about, I mean, do you want them to treat you differently because you have a limb difference? Do you want them to know about it, but treat you the same way they treat anyone? Like, I want to get down to the pragmatic. So what do we do about it?
Yep. No, and I want to address your first point too, because I think the piece about white men, it's interesting. White men are actually hiding parts of their differences at work too, right? They hide their mental health, they hide their age, they hide pieces of their identity, which contributes to not getting to know people and leaving them out of the conversation. But to answer your question around how do I want people, when that person said to me, I don't see you that way, or we don't see you that way, what it made me realize is I hadn't been sharing my story. I had stopped physically hiding my hand at that point. So people knew I had a limb difference and a disability, but I hadn't actually shared out my experience. So I was still hiding in some ways. I wasn't sharing me. And so, how could I expect people to see me that way if I wasn't acknowledging it or being seen that way? And I think to your question around how do I want people to approach me, I think with disability, again, whether it's visible or invisible, and frankly, Mike, any difference, I think it's a case by case basis. And I think it's a really kind of difficult rule to follow in the sense that I am definitely out there. I want people to ask me about my limb difference and my experience. And I also recognize that's my perspective. That's one experience. There may be others with differences and disabilities who don't want to ask. So I caution people, A, to be able to respect people's boundaries around how we ask questions and to understand and think through, why are you asking? Why do you need to know? Is it out of curiosity? Is it out of curiosity and kindness? And I would add on the best example, the best kind of solution for asking is, Is it out of curiosity? Is it out of kindness? And is it out of support? Because that's why you get to know. Is it helpful to you because you can support me in some way? You're not making assumptions about my ability. You're just asking, how can I help? Do you need support? And then I can open up. I know I was born with a disability, so I got it. Like I'm not hiding it anymore. But I do think it's not something, Mike, like that if we think about it, when we pass traffic accidents and we think, oh, what happened there? We don't need to know always unless we can support. That's what I think about with disability. How are you thinking about it out of curiosity and kindness and support?
I love that because before you said that, my thought was, wow, I think you're right. There are some people that are comfortable talking about it, want to talk about it, others that aren't. And I thought, wow, what a landmines to kind of walk through a field of landmines. Like, how do you know you got to tiptoe through? But I love what you just said. I think it feels a lot, for me, it feels a lot less like a dangerous place that I've got to tiptoe through if you're doing it because you're curious, because you want to support. Then I think even if someone is not real comfortable talking about it, it's not asking about it. It's in the way you ask about it with the attitude and the mindset you have, it becomes a much safer place to have that discussion.
Absolutely. I think that's a great word for it. It's shifting mindset about why do you need to know. It's allowing yourself some self-reflection about why is it important to know. And also recognizing that I think sometimes with disability, the boundaries get blurred. Like we make assumptions about people's ability, right? That's one boundary that we make assumptions. The second is we also feel like we have the right to ask people about their disabilities that and things that we necessarily wouldn't answer ourselves, right? If somebody asked us a personal question. So it's being mindful of why am I asking? Why do I need to know? And again, I'm someone again who was born with a limb difference. I'm okay talking about it. And I'm also okay letting you know that I've kind of navigated this world in ways that you can't imagine. And I've made accommodations and made myself, my world accessible in ways that you can't imagine. So lessening the assumptions that we make about disability.
Love it. Love it. Tell us a little bit about I'll still call it a new book. It's very new, right? Single handedly. Tell us about the book and why you thought it was important to get that message out there now.
Interesting. I wrote the book after I did my TEDx, and the TEDx was really this kind of microcosm, like of an idea because you only have a limited amount of time to tell a story and to get a point across, an idea worth spreading. And as I came out of that TEDx experience, which clarifies a lot of thinking, it forces you to really hone in on a message. I realized there was a much more extended message. And people had asked me after watching my TEDx, well, what are some more of the stories here? Like, tell me why you hid, how you hid. People ask me all the time, did you really hide for 25 years? Like, tell me about that. What was that like? When did it start? Why did you continue to do it? And so I felt like there was an audience for understanding the hiding process. And there's also people asking for solutions around how did you learn to unhide? What were the steps that you took? And what I found, Mike, in doing not only the writing and the research, but really the feedback is hiding is actually a universal thing. Most of us are hiding something about ourselves. And so, what was interesting as I was kind of writing the book, people were starting to share, and they share much more now, the places where they hide. And it's not only about disability. People hide things like their age, they hide their education, they hide their financial status, their family background. People are hiding even their religion and their politics, more so now than ever, right? So that it keeps us not connected because we're always worried that someone's going to find out. And hiding is exhausting and it's lonely. And so people want solutions to how do we actually unhide? And so I wanted to be able to provide that. And I also, in single handedly, wanted to be able to talk about this idea of how do we expand diversity? Because disability needs to be included in that conversation. And so I used the book as a tool to share the journey of hiding and unhiding. and also weave in, how do we expand diversity?
How hard was it for you when you made that decision to stop hiding?
Mm.
How hard was it for you to start having those conversations? And again, I'm asking you, it's specific to your limb difference, but to your point, the bigger reason I'm asking is if most of us are hiding things, I think your answer will help everybody listening get more comfortable sharing what they haven't been comfortable sharing. So what was it like for you when you started doing it? What were some things that helped you along the way?
Sure. I think that for your listeners, I think there's a piece around understanding where you're hiding, right? That's the first step is almost admitting it, creating an awareness, doing the introspective work. So I had been in therapy about it. I had journaled about it. I had started to think about how exhausting and how lonely it was. And it was one pivotal kind of moment of when I realized, wow, I am not going to be able to be in a healthy relationship because I'm so putting up the walls around myself because of the hiding. I was so afraid that if someone found out about it, that they wouldn't like me and that they wouldn't date me, they wouldn't fall in love with me. So that became my space of, do I want this for the rest of my life? Have I made an acceptance that this is how I have to live? And it wasn't until I met someone that I invited in, just one person, Mike, sometimes is all it takes. Is for me, it was inviting that person in to show me how to love that part of myself that I deemed unlovable and that I truly didn't believe that was lovable. I didn't know a way out. And so I invited this person in to show me how to start to touch my hand, how to look at it, how to actually connect with it. And I couldn't do that work myself. And I had tried some methods. I'd even talked myself into this time you're starting something new, like going to college or starting a new job. Nobody knows you. Start just fresh. But the messages in my head were so downplayed that this could be something good. They made it sound like it was going to be horrible that I literally had to go every time and talk myself through, and I ended up I kept hiding. And that's not a way to live. Mike, I was just on a plane heading out of town, and I was telling people what I did. And literally the minute that I shared about this idea of hiding, one of the passengers sitting next to me bowed his head down. And I asked him, I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "You're talking about hiding." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I dropped out of high school and I don't talk about it ever." He said, "I have so much shame around it that when those conversations about, oh, where did you go to college? Or where's your child going to college? Or, how are you involved in your alumni network? How great was college? It was the best 4 years of our life." He said, "I want to leave the room because no one knows that part. And yet I've built a successful business. I've done all these things, but I hold shame. My fear is if people find out, they won't think that I'm smart. They won't think that I'm educated, that I don't have business savvy, but it's not true. But I'm holding that, and that keeps us from connecting with other people. And it also keeps us from being our best self because we're hiding. So I answer your question in a long way that I think sometimes it's just literally about letting one other person know so they can help dispel the myths. Because truthfully, Mike, my hand was never the disability. The mindset I carried around it was the disability.
Ooh, that's a quote right there that's gotta go on a social media post.
Right.
I love that, and what I love about what you just said is the impact this can have, the effect this can have for folks that are leaders, and what I mean by that, and I focus on that because the whole lens of this show is about creating a better leadership team. When I think about members of the leadership team, how important is it, just like what you did on the plane, which was somebody you didn't know who wound up sharing something with you that he hadn't shared with some of the closest people that he worked with. How important is it for leaders to share more, open up more, be vulnerable, unhide? How important is it for them to do it for the sole reason, yes, it makes them feel better, but helping other people to feel comfortable doing the same thing?
It is, Mike, I fought against this leadership thing for a long time. Having been a CEO and a leader in organizations, people would come in with that question, oh, what's the culture here? And I would deflect it and say, everybody's responsible for culture. It's not just the CEO or the leadership team. It's not actually accurate. The accuracy is the leadership team and the CEO are responsible for culture and modeling vulnerability and modeling the things that we're asking our staffs to do and our teams to do around bringing their quote unquote authentic self to work or their full self to work. They have to model it too. We have to model it as leaders, right? Because how can we expect others to do that? And what I realized in writing my book is that there were times I wasn't modeling. I was creating a toxic work environment for people because I was expecting people to be perfect, to hold back, to not be vulnerable, to not make mistakes. And that's not a healthy work environment. And if I couldn't do that as a leader and show that, how could I expect my teams to do those things? Because I can tell you, part of the beauty of unhiding and sharing it is that first exhale that people, when they get to tell you something, it's an amazing feeling. Like when you connect with somebody and they can tell you what they're hiding. And then what's even more beautiful is when they can start to then connect with people who are also in that space of their difference. And then they can start to share out their story. So it becomes this loop. And it's really this cool loop of, wow, I shared it with, it's almost like that old commercial. I told two people and they told two people and
The
so on.
shampoo commercial, yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing because then we start to create these cultures as leaders of people who really want to connect with each other and want to show up and aren't afraid of their differences because I've said and I've shared out loud that I value different perspectives. I share out loud that I want people who think outside the box, have creative solutions. And I've also shared that this is a safe place to do that because we want innovative ideas. When we hold back parts of ourselves, we ruin three things. We are worried about ourselves. So we're constantly thinking and forecasting next steps so we don't get discovered when we hide. We hold back from our teams really getting to know us, right? Because then we're always worried that, oh, if I go to the happy hour after work or if I go to the retreat, somebody's going to find out something. So I'm going to not share. And then the third thing is we don't actually then give the company the benefit of our innovative ideas and our thinking because we're holding back. And I saw it. Somebody came up to me, Mike, I'll never forget, after one of my sessions, and you know this space too, is where they wait for you after and to talk after you've given a speech. And someone came up and they told me about how they have a stutter and they don't share that at work. And because they're afraid of being seen as not smart enough, or that people will get annoyed that it's such a time, we have to wait in time until they can get out the words. So they don't talk. And I said, wow, so they're missing out on you because they don't get to know you, that you don't actually get to feel comfortable at work. They don't get to know you. And the company misses out because they don't get to hear all of the ideas because you're so worried about being found out about your stutter that you're not participating. That's not what we want with a workforce. And as leaders, we don't want that either with our teams.
I love that. And there's a speech that I do. In fact, it was my TEDx that I did where I get pretty vulnerable about a special need, my son who has special needs. And it amazes me, Ruth, I think about this when you say the person was waiting for you after the speech. It amazes me that every time I tell that story and I get vulnerable about it, and I frankly talk about what a crappy dad I was when he was very young, there's always at least one person waiting for me that says, "Oh my God, it sounded like you were telling my story." And what it helps people to do is because other people aren't sharing, they feel alone. And then when you share, they're like, "Oh my God, I'm not alone. I've
To-
done the same thing, or I'm the same way, or I have something similar, or I have something very different." Like, how different is a limb difference and not graduating high school? Pretty different, but not so different when you just talk about hiding. So that's amazing. So again, I want to go back to the leadership team. And when I work with leadership teams and they think of diversity, equity, inclusion, they right away think of it as it's sex, it's race, well, those are the main two things. And they, again, getting real pragmatic. There's one team I look at, and frankly, it's a bunch of white men in their 50s and early 60s that make up the leadership team. And they look at it and go, well, we get it. We get it's important, but what are we supposed to do? Like, we keep being told you got to model it from the top down. I'm not going to fire myself so I could bring a younger, So when you think of, there are still a lot of leadership teams around that are not diverse, whether it's disabilities or it's race or sex. How should a leadership team be pragmatically thinking about the steps they can take?
Sure. No, I built out a whole framework for exactly this conversation, Mike.
Beautiful.
It's called the Cure to Inclusion, and it's an acronym for CURE, which is connection, understanding, representation, and empathy. And I've built out steps, and where it starts, Mike, to your exact question, is it starts with understanding. With the leadership team, the idea is, where have you felt different in your life where you needed to fit in? So there's an introspection piece, because before you can do really good DEI work, it starts with understanding. It starts with understanding yourself. Where have you felt like you needed to fit in? Where have you felt like you have felt different? And how do you understand difference? Because that's a piece of it also. What do you know about differences? How have you done the learning and being proactive outside? I can tell you, when George Floyd's death happened and Black Lives Matter was really in its rising phase, I had a staff who said, "So, Ruth, what's the action? What are we doing? You need to get on top of this." And I had to take a step back and say to them, I have a lot of work to do outside of here. It is not your job as my team to teach me. It's not the students and families that I was working with, their job to teach me. I had to proactively go out and learn what I didn't know and do the work outside for understanding, because only then could I come back and listen and connect with them. That's why connection is the second step. It's the understanding piece that has to come first. And then it's about, how do I then connect? How do I listen with empathy? How do I listen with questions? How do I listen and share? That's the second step, is connection. And then it's doing almost an audit or an inventory of your team, Mike. The idea of whose voices are heard on your team, whose voices are missing from the table. So there's this representation piece. It's an audit or an inventory that becomes important to start to look around as a leadership team to say, even again, if it's all white men, and again, I love working with teams with white men like you do, because I think that there's space for learning on both sides. What have you had the power around? What do you still need to learn? So that representation piece becomes a critical tool in this leadership process. And then it's thinking about empathy. How do we necessarily put ourselves in the shoes of someone, but how do we start to listen with empathy? How do we ask questions out of curiosity? How do we understand someone else's perspective? And how do we value different perspectives? Because at the heart of all of this is belonging, because those are the cultures we want to create in our workforces. And the reality is, Mike, 61% of people, of their employees, are hiding something about themselves. That's this Deloitte study from 2013. I actually think that number's higher. That most people on our teams and leaders are hiding something. So if we create a space around understanding, connection, representation, and empathy, that's what drives the idea of belonging and the feeling of belonging.
What I love about that is, frankly, the way I have thought about it in years past and the way a lot of leadership teams think about it is they just think about, oh, I've got to have diversity on the team. I look across, I don't see different colors around the table. I don't see different sexes around the table. And not that that's not important, but if you do the things you talked about, around understanding and connection and, the audit, the inventory, empathy, you could do all of those things with the team you have now. And
Totally.
and if you do all those things, what will your team look like 5 years from now? Maybe the team itself will look a little different than it does now and more diverse. But I just love the idea that there are actions you can take without people throwing up their hands and saying, well, I can't just fire people from the team and hire. That's not what it's about. There's a lot of things you can do that have nothing to do with changing who's on your team right now.
Right. Or put out a statement that feels like it's nothing, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes what I saw companies also do is just start by putting out a statement and not necessarily the tangibles behind it. And so, yes, you can start with your team. And I don't think it takes 5 years to implement. I think you can start those conversations and start to realize who is missing, like who's supposed to be here with us. And are there people not necessarily on the leadership team, but those employee resource groups or affinity groups that we can start to learn from and also connect with to meet our company goals, because that's what we really, that's the power of affinity and employee resource groups, is they have an ear to the ground and they also have a lens, and they need executive sponsorship and dollars to continue to build out that piece. They're the recruitment tool for your company. That's why people want to work there. They connect with them. And the key to this whole thing, Mike, is that unhiding builds connection. That's the key to this. Because when we hide, we stay apart. When we unhide, we get connected.
You ever read The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle? If you
No.
haven't, you should read it. And for the listeners, if you haven't read it, it's a wonderful book. Read it right after you read mine and Ruth's, then read that book. But he
Okay.
talks about, I forget if he calls it the trust loop or the vulnerability loop. And you, Ruth, you had mentioned this before. You didn't call it this, but you said almost what I'm about to say, where the idea of the trust loop is you start, opposed to saying, I will trust someone when they earn my trust. You start by trusting and being vulnerable. And I share something with you. I unhide with you. I share something with you. That makes you trust me more and you feel more comfortable sharing something with me. And then you share that with me. I feel even more comfortable with you. And we get this loop of just increased trust and vulnerability, which is beautiful.
Absolutely. And I think what you're also bringing up, and to add on to that, is it's also a two-way street, right? We can't just expect people, leaders, to be vulnerable and then staff and teams not to, right? Like it's a two-way street. You have to look at it from both angles. They have to both come together, because otherwise it doesn't work. That loop stops. It
Yeah.
doesn't keep going. And then somebody feels burnt, or they feel that, why did I waste my time? This person's not getting it. It has to be a commitment on both sides to create that space for trust.
I guess I'll call them nuts and bolts CEOs and CFOs that may be listening saying, this all sounds good, but I've got a business to run.
Mhm.
And I've got, I got to hit this net income. I've got to, hit these quarterly revenue numbers. Is there a business case for this? What's the return on investment of getting better at this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because when you run a business, it is, at the end of the day, this is not turning into a Dr. Phil show or a Jerry Springer show to make it even more intense. This is really about running a business. And I think that it hits three things when we think about diversity and inclusion in a different way. It hits a retention thing, because something that we're all dealing with right now in terms of getting teams to stay in our workplaces, getting people to, because we know the cost of losing employees. It's high. So it helps through the retention lens. It also engages people on the engagement part of work. And so how do people feel? Like, you get the best out of people when they feel like they belong. So, and that means that your numbers are going to go up. That means that that return on investment for spending the time thinking about it, your engagement scores are going to go up, and your innovation scores are going to go up. Because when you bring your best self to work and your most valued self to work, you get more innovation out of people. You get people who believe in the brand. You get leaders who are trusted leaders that people want to work with and stay with. You have leaders who want to stay and are trusted. And you also have a community of people who are seeing that, because you now represent that diversity and inclusion in a different way are important to you as a company. It becomes your value. You value different perspectives, and the company starts to shine. So there is absolutely a business case for it. I think we are taught an old model often with leadership, right? And this is your work and your your bailiwick. Is that the right word?
Uh, e- Either
Yeah,
one works. I
all
think
of
it's
it.
bailiwick, but either one
Bailiwick.
works.
we're taught an old model of leadership, to your point. We're taught, oh, be strong, be tough, don't be vulnerable, don't show flaws, don't show weaknesses. And I'm saying you can maintain that and still show empathy and build empathy. You can still continue to build out that there needs to be a business case for why we're doing this and how we're moving it forward. And you can start to build empathy with your leaders and yourself.
I love it. And if you're thinking about a business case, you talked about retention, you talked about productivity, you talked about innovation. Along with that goes, you have all those things. You're attracting better people into the organization and more diverse folks, more diverse ideas into the organization. I'm not sure there's a better business case than if you can truly impact those things.
And we want people to return to work, right? We want people to return even to the office, even in a different way of thinking about it. Well, how are we going to get them there? We need to provide a culture that sees them and that hears them and where they feel like they belong.
What would, as we start to wrap up, if you can give one piece of advice to a leader who really hasn't done much thinking about DEI, they haven't made much progress. What's your advice? What's the first thing they ought to be focusing on, the first thing they ought to be taking action on?
I think that to know that they're not alone. I think a lot of companies, Mike, and a lot of leaders are struggling with the DEI piece because we're not seeing the needle move the way that we had wanted it to. And so I think there's that piece of just recognizing, A, you're not alone. So not to run from it and not to dive head in and not think about how to do it, which I see both happening with leaders is either I'm going to avoid it or I'm going to dive in and I haven't thought about the action strategy. So I think the first place to start is that understanding part, just to take some self-reflection time to think about what are my DEI leaders and my HR leaders in my organization saying, right? What do I not know? What have I heard and what do I not know? Asking some questions, being curious, and then going out and being proactive to do the learning outside of work so that you can have those informed conversations and connections when you come back. It's a starting place. It's not the only thing, but it's a starting place is to start to have that introspection time of what do I know and what do I not know around DEI.
And for folks that want to go further with that, tell me a little bit about the types of work you do with your clients.
Sure. So most of my work is through speaking. I come into companies. This is also a place, Mike, that I think a lot of leaders can look at is bringing in people with differences to start those conversations in companies where employees may not feel safe to quote unquote out themselves with differences, whether it's around race or gender or sexual orientation and disability, to bring in and start to navigate and kind of look at who is talking about some of this stuff and start to bring in those speakers. What I do with companies is I work with leaders to expand the conversation on diversity through the cure to inclusion. So it starts typically as a keynote to raise awareness. And then I work with leadership teams around how do they start those conversations internally as a leadership team? Because again, it belongs with leaders. How are they thinking about their employee resource groups in terms of what's working and what's not? How do we give them more voice? So that's a space that I work with. And then I do some coaching with individuals on leadership teams around how can they be more inclusive as a leader. And so that's really kind of those three. It starts with typically though, people bring me in to speak and they say, how can we continue? Because we know 60 minutes is not enough time to change mindset. It's just a taste. And then how do we build out what that looks like? And how do we think about, I mean, I work a lot of times with advertising agencies and media companies. How are people being represented? How do we think about representation? So that's another piece of my work.
Excellent. Excellent. So, in addition to obviously everyone listening to this is going to go buy your book single handedly out on Amazon. They're going to buy it for their leadership teams. They're going to buy it for their friends, their parents, their kids. In addition to that, where, Ruth, should people go if they want to find out more about you?
No, thank you, Mike. I think the first place is my website, so ruthrathblott.com. And then I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. Probably similar to you. I connect with people on LinkedIn to really talk about this conversation of expanding diversity and unhiding. Because what I'm trying to do is to build a community around unhiding so that we create that as a norm rather than it being seen as somebody who's just being nice that wants to, share their secret with you. No, it's a community where you feel safe to share what's going on so that you can thrive and you can belong at work so that it's not holding you back anymore.
Amazing. Those links will be in the show notes for those listening on the website for the podcast. The link to her book and link to all this stuff will be in the show notes. Ruth, this was amazing. I appreciate you coming on.
No, Mike, I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful for the work that you do with leaders because that's what's moving the needle forward is how do we get leadership teams to actually embrace concepts and think about how to do things differently as we move forward? How do we reinvent leadership?
I love doing it. And I know you love doing what you do. So, hey, thanks again.
Thank you, Mike.